Some kings died like legends. These kings? These kings died like deleted cartoon scenes that history probably wanted to uninstall. Not in glorious battle, not with final speeches, not surrounded by knights whispering, "Your Majesty, you were so brave." No, some got destroyed by doors, deer, toilets, fish, candles, and mankind's oldest undefeated enemy, basic physics. And the first king proves something important. You can survive Vikings, rule a kingdom, and wear a crown at 16. But if a doorway is too low, congratulations. The doorway is now king, and your dynasty has a design problem. Meet Louis III, King of West Francia, which sounds like France before it finished downloading and installed a flag. His father, Louis II, ruled peacefully for about 2 years, from 877 to 879. Very calm, very gentle, very short. Then he died, which was honestly the most peaceful political position available in medieval Europe. Hard to betray a corpse. That left Louis III with a crown, a kingdom, and the emotional maturity of a teenager who had just discovered taxes. There was one tiny problem. His claim to the throne was messy, which is medieval for prepare the suspicious eyebrows. His parents had married in secret before he was born, so some nobles looked at Louis like a royal paperwork error. Not ideal. When you are 16 and ruling Europe, you do not want nobles auditing your birth certificate. So Louis made a deal with his younger brother, Carloman II, instead of fighting over the throne like normal medieval siblings. Very mature, very responsible, very suspiciously temporary. They agreed to rule together because nothing says stability like two teenagers. They split West Francia between them. Louis got the north, Carloman got the south. Basically, royal bedroom territory rules. One kingdom became two teenage boys saying, "This side is mine, don't touch my stuff." And somehow, it worked. Together, the brothers fought off rivals from East Francia who challenged their rule, because apparently one France was not confusing enough. There were battles, losses, negotiations, the usual medieval smoothie of mud, steel, and men named Louis. Eventually, West Francia had to give up some territory. Not great, but the kingdom survived, which counted as a win. Louis survived. Carloman survived. And just when things started looking stable, history opened the door. Not the deadly door yet. That one is coming. First came the Vikings because medieval Europe apparently had an angry Scandinavian subscription service. In 881, Viking raiders began attacking Frankish lands, ruining villages, burning settlements, and stealing everything not nailed down. And honestly, they probably stole the nails too. Efficiency matters when your business model is terrifying everyone near a river. East Francia fought them first and managed to beat them back. So the Vikings looked west and thought, maybe softer Franks? Bad idea, because West Francia had two kings. Two teenage kings, which sounds like a crisis but somehow helped. Louis and Carloman launched a surprise offensive against the Viking force. And this was not a cute little skirmish. This was a real victory. Their army reportedly cut down thousands of Viking fighters and turned raiding into consequences. Suddenly, Louis III was not just a questionable teenage monarch anymore. He was a Viking slayer, which upgrades any resume immediately. He became a defender of the kingdom, praised by both Western and Eastern Frankish realms. Imagine that hitting a 16-year-old brain. One week, nobles question your crown. Next week, people say you folded the Vikings like laundry. That ego had altitude. And that is where the story changes. Once a young king survives legitimacy drama, rivals, and Vikings, he starts thinking about legacy. The crown is secure. The songs are being sung. The peasants are impressed. Now he needs a queen, a dynasty, an heir. A little royal sequel. So in 882, Louis turned his attention from war to romance, which is where caution left the room. And by romance, I mean he allegedly started chasing a young woman on horseback. Medieval courtship. somehow worse with transportation. The details are not wrapped in a modern consent form, so let's call it a medieval HR complaint with horses. The young woman fled toward her father's house. Louis followed on horseback, very heroic, very royal, very, "Why are you running?" And at this exact moment, history placed a low doorway in front of him. A doorway. That was the boss fight. Pause. This man had faced warriors from the north, succession politics, and invasion. Nobody trained him for stealing too close to face. Louis rode after her. The horse kept going. The doorway did not move because architecture is famously stubborn. The top of that doorway connected with the royal skull so hard that his love life, bloodline, and future ended together. That was it. No final duel, no tragic betrayal. Just a teenage king, a horse, a doorway, and one embarrassing bonk. Louis III died young, without producing an heir, which meant Carloman was left to rule alone, probably staring at every door. You would think Carloman, after seeing his brother deleted by home design, might become careful. Avoid horses, avoid doors. Maybe live in a padded room until 30. But no. Carloman died 2 years later during a hunting trip. He was accidentally stabbed by his own servant. In royal history, hunting trip means the writers are removing a character. So in just a few years, one brother got taken out by a doorway, and the other by bad supervision in the woods. A royal line does not end with thunder. It ends with poor spatial awareness and one extremely questionable hunting staff meeting. And that is the horror hiding under the comedy. History dresses kings in gold, horses, statues, banners, and dramatic music. But underneath all that, a king is still just a human body. Soft head, bad timing, very breakable. Louis III had power, soldiers, victory, and a crown. But the doorway did not care. Architecture rarely respects monarchy. That is why this story is the perfect beginning, because from here, every royal death gets stranger. One emperor will claw from poverty to absolute power, only to discover deer are not impressed by career development. One English king will fight Vikings with iron determination, then meet fate on the least dignified throne in the building. And one ruler called the Bad will betray everyone before losing his final battle to a candle. History has range. So yes, Louis III died because of a doorway, but somehow the doorway is not even the dumbest killer here. So far, we have learned one important lesson. A king can beat Vikings, but he cannot beat architecture. And unfortunately for royal dignity, the next ruler did not lose to a doorway. No. He lost to a deer. Wait, not metaphorically, an actual deer. Because history occasionally hires wildlife as unpaid political consultants. But before the deer enters like the world's least expected assassin, we need Basil I and his extremely strange life. Basil's story did not begin with gold, silk, or dramatic palace music. It began in poverty. He was born around 811 into a poor Armenian family in Byzantine Macedonia, which already sounds like unwanted motivation. Baby Basil had no throne, no army, and no childhood where people whispered, "One day this boy rules an empire." Mostly because when Basil was about 2 years old, he and his family were captured by Bulgarians. Bad start. Extremely bad. But Basil survived. He eventually escaped captivity, although eventually meant roughly 23 years, which is basically customer service hold music. Still, freedom is freedom. Once Basil reached Constantinople, he began one of history's weirdest social climbs. He started low, very low, stable boy low, horse smell on your clothes low. Not exactly emperor material, visually speaking. But Basil had two things: medieval society loved. Physical strength and charisma strong enough to make nobles ignore red flags. He worked as a servant. He impressed nobles. He attracted help from a wealthy older woman who boosted his rise. He wrestled. He bodyguarded. He basically speed ran the Byzantine social ladder like he found a glitch in the empire. Eventually, Basil became bodyguard to Emperor Michael III. For most people, standing near the emperor would be the dream. Look intimidating. Protect the important man. Retire with a weird pension and maybe a nice cloak. Very respectable. But Basil was not most people. Basil looked at the imperial court and saw a ladder. Unfortunately, he could climb. He gained Michael's trust. Then he convinced Michael that the emperor's own uncle was plotting against him. Was the uncle actually plotting? That part is cloudy. But Michael believed Basil, which was the important and dangerous part. And Basil was allowed to solve the problem. Medieval politics had many solutions, most of them murder wearing a hat. After this display of loyalty, Michael rewarded Basil by making him co-emperor, which probably felt smart for 8 minutes. Because now Basil was standing right next to the throne. Not near it. Not under it. Next to it. And once a man climbs from stable boy to co-emperor, there is only one promotion left. Unfortunately for Michael, Basil's final career obstacle was Michael. That is not a great position to occupy. So in 867, Basil helped remove that obstacle with a sword. Very permanently. Medieval HR was not taking notes. And just like that, the poor boy from Macedonia became full emperor of the Byzantine Empire. That should not have worked. But it did. And weirdly, Basil turned out to be pretty good at the job, which is annoying for moral clarity. Under him, the Macedonian dynasty began, and Byzantium entered a period of strength, construction, culture, and legal reform. So yes, Basil got the crown through murder. Then he looked around and said, "Okay, now let's govern." And that makes his death ridiculous. This man survived captivity, poverty, and the imperial court. The imperial court was basically a marble building full of knives wearing perfume. Somehow, Basil survived that too. He survived betrayal, mostly because he was often the one doing it. He became emperor. He founded a dynasty. And then came the hunting trip. Again. At this point, every royal court should have banned forests. Because hunting trips in royal history are not hobbies. They are foreshadowing with trees and unpaid medical bills. In 886, Basil went hunting, and somehow his belt became stuck in the antlers of a deer. Just picture that. The emperor of the Romans, the man who climbed higher than almost anyone, attached to a deer by his belt. The deer, not understanding court etiquette, began running. And Basil went with it, because physics had already signed the paperwork. Dragged over the ground across the countryside, the imperial body skipped along like an unwanted sack of laundry. The exact distance varies. Emotionally, though, 1 foot is too far when your Uber has antlers. Eventually, a servant cut Basil free. Heroic, right? A loyal man sees deer delivery to the afterlife and helps. And Basil rewarded him by accusing him of attempted murder. Wait. What? The servant had a knife because rescue required cutting. But Basil, injured and suspicious, apparently saw the blade and thought, "Ah yes, the deer was part of a conspiracy." The servant was executed. Basil later died from his injuries. So the rescue somehow became another career-ending decision. Final moral: you can betray your way to the top and found a dynasty, but history will remember the deer. And now that royalty has lost to a doorway and a deer, you may think the next death gets dignified. No. The next king dies on the toilet. I wish that was a joke. It is not enough of a joke. Meet Edmund Ironside, King of England for a very stressful 7 months in 1016. 7 months. Luxury internship. Edmund became king when England had a serious Danish Viking problem. Not someone stole a goat serious. Kingdom threatening serious. The Danes pushed hard into England, and Edmund had to fight back with whatever forces he could gather. And to his credit, he did. Edmund fought like a man who did not want his obituary written in Danish. He won several battles. He resisted fiercely. He earned the nickname Ironside, which is excellent branding for not being conquered. For a moment, he looked like the man who might save Anglo-Saxon England. Then came the Battle of Assendun. The English lost. The Danes won. Edmund had to make peace with Nut, the Danish king. The treaty divided England. Edmund kept Wessex. Nut took the lands north of the Thames. Very neat. Very suspicious. Then they added one tiny clause. Whichever king died first, the other would inherit the whole country. Now, I am not a medieval legal expert, but that feels like a murder invitation with borders. And then, about a month later, Edmund died. Convenient. Very convenient. History rarely rings the alarm bell louder. According to later stories, Edmund was sitting on his private toilet when an assassin hiding underneath struck upward with a blade. Yes, one of England's toughest warrior kings may have met his end from below the bathroom throne. History gave him the name Ironside, but it did not give him bathroom security. That department was apparently underfunded. Historians debate this story because medieval sources loved dramatic death scenes and blaming everything on betrayal. But as historical legend, it is unforgettable. A kingdom, a treaty, and someone weaponizing the toilet. Horrifying, disgusting, extremely memorable. Nut inherited the whole kingdom and ruled England for years afterward. If the toilet story is true, one major English power transfer happened because the palace bathroom had a security flaw. And that brings us back to the pattern: doorway, deer, and possibly plumbing with political ambition. These men commanded armies, signed treaties, and shaped borders. But their final enemies were often not other rulers. Sometimes the enemy was a low ceiling, sometimes wildlife, sometimes the assumption nobody is hiding under your toilet. And somehow, we are still not at the stupidest death, because next comes a king with a conquest-built family. His throne was surrounded by suspicion, his heir died in a maritime disaster, and his dynasty ended because of fish. Not normal fish, of course. That would be too dignified. At this point, history refuses to behave. The scoreboard is uncomfortable. Doorway 1, deer 1, possibly toilet 1. Now we arrive at Henry III of England. Henry was the youngest son of William the Conqueror, which is already a terrible starting position if your dream is crown ownership. When William died in 1087, he divided his possessions among his sons, because nothing says family peace like inheritance math. Robert got Normandy, William Rufus got England. Richard got nothing because he was already dead. Efficient in the worst way. Hunting accident, by the way. Yes, again. Medieval nobility saw forests and immediately started deleting heirs. And then there was Henry. Henry got money. A lot of money. But not the crown and not Normandy. Just cash, and a small slice of land that William II basically took back immediately. Brotherly love, Norman edition. So Henry had money, resentment, and a front row seat to Europe's most dangerous reality show. Royal succession. William II became King of England. He was harsh, arrogant, and unpopular enough that nobody was preparing extra tissues. Then in 1100, William II went hunting in the New Forest. Pause. You already know this is bad. A royal hunting trip is not leisure. It is a loading screen for disaster, usually with trees and terrible supervision. During the hunt, William was struck by an arrow and died. Officially, it was an accident. Friendly fire, very unfriendly. But because this is medieval politics, everyone immediately side-eyed the nearest beneficiary. And the nearest beneficiary was Henry. Henry did something interesting after hearing his brother was dead. He did not sit quietly or organize a long mourning ceremony. He did not say, "Wow, what a shocking tragedy. Let us reflect." No. Henry sprinted to the royal treasury. He secured the crown with the urgency of a man claiming the last slice of cake at a funeral. Was he involved? We do not know. History shrugs, but Henry's speed did not exactly make him look innocent. Still, innocent or not, it worked. Henry became King Henry I of England, and weirdly, he was competent. He was educated, reformed royal administration, strengthened law, managed money well, and kept his older brother Robert imprisoned forever. Family bonding looked different back then. Henry ruled for decades with power, legitimacy, and many illegitimate children. Medieval kings treated consequences like optional DLC. But Henry had only one legitimate son who truly mattered for succession. That son was William Adelin, the future, the heir, the safe bridge from one generation to the next. And then came the White Ship disaster. In 1120, William boarded a ship with many young nobles. The ship struck a rock and sank in the English Channel. Nearly everyone on board died. Only one person survived. And it was not the prince. That single disaster ripped the future out of Henry's hands. The king who had taken power so quickly now had no clear male heir. His daughter Matilda could inherit. But many nobles were not thrilled by the idea of a woman ruling England. Medieval politics had limits, apparently. They could invent taxes, siege engines, and dynastic treaties, but a queen made everyone lose their tiny metal hats. Henry was devastated. Older, grieving, politically trapped. So how did one of England's most capable kings comfort himself? With food, specifically lampreys. If you do not know lampreys, imagine an eel designed by someone who hates mouths. It is long, slippery. It has a circular suction face full of teeth. Nightmare seafood, basically. If Nightmares opened a restaurant, lamprey would be the house special. And Henry loved them because grief makes choices weird. His doctor reportedly warned him not to eat too many reasonable advice when your favorite food looks cursed. But Henry ignored the warning. Because nothing says, "I command a kingdom," like losing a debate with your appetite. In 1135, Henry ate too many lampreys, became seriously ill, and died. The dynasty did not need a sword. A conqueror's son, clever ruler, throne Caesar, government reformer, ended by forbidden fish, or fish-adjacent horror tubes. The Norman dynasty ended because a grieving king looked at tooth eels and said, "Actually, bring more." And now we move from appetite to arson because our next king was not merely unlucky. He was called Charles the Bad. Not Charles the Misunderstood, not Charles the Slightly Difficult, Charles the Bad. History did not overwork the branding team. Charles II of Navarre was born into royal ambition and lifelong resentment. A tiny kingdom was never going to satisfy him. He had French royal blood and believed he deserved far more than Navarre, a small kingdom in northern modern Spain. To Charles, Navarre was not a kingdom. It was an insult with borders, and he wanted influence in France. He wanted power, recognition, and decades of political chaos delivered directly to everyone around him. During the 100 Years' War, Charles played England and France against each other like a man juggling knives in a closet. He switched sides, made promises, broke promises, supported rebellions, and suppressed rebellions whenever that looked more profitable. He could enter a room, shake every hand, and somehow leave with 3 alliances and 5 future enemies. At one point, during conflicts in Spain, he even staged his own kidnapping to avoid fighting. Cowardice, but theatrical. But tricks stop working eventually. By the late 1370s, Charles had lost much of his political influence. His little kingdom was attacked. His plans collapsed. His reputation became less mastermind and more annoying rat with a crown. Years later, in 1387, Charles fell seriously ill. He was almost immobile, which is bad for a professional schemer. His doctor prescribed a treatment that sounds less like medicine and more like a dare: alcohol-soaked linen sheets. Every night, servants would sew the sheets around him, because helpless sick kings and flammable fabric apparently felt reasonable. If there is one thing you want near a sick, immobile king, it is definitely not alcohol-soaked cloth. One night, a maid finished sewing him into the linen, but she had no scissors to cut the final thread. No blade nearby, no safe tool. So she made a decision so bad you can feel history inhale. She used a candle flame to burn through the thread. Alcohol-soaked linen. Open flame. Sick, immobile king. Excellent recipe. The sheets caught fire. The maid panicked and fled. Charles the Bad was burned in his own bed. Horrible. Brutal. And in the darkest possible way, almost poetic, considering his lifelong hobbies. Charles wanted to be a great king of France. Instead, he became a warning label about candles and healthcare. So now the list has escalated. Doorway, deer, toilet, lampreys, candle. Royal dignity is losing badly. And we still have one final death. A king celebrating peace at a tournament designed for glory. A perfect royal stage. Nobles, family, soldiers, cheering crowds. Naturally, history turned it into a horror scene. So far, royal dignity has taken a beating. A doorway defeated a teenage Viking slayer. A deer dragged an emperor. A toilet may have changed England. Lampreys ended a dynasty, and a candle turned Charles the Bad into Charles the Barbecue. So for our final death, you might expect something quieter. Maybe old age, maybe peace, maybe one graceful exit. No, absolutely not. Our last king celebrated peace by joining a sport where armored men weaponized tree branches. Meet Henry II of France, king from 1547 to 1559, almost normal compared with the disaster gremlins so far. Not harmless, definitely not harmless, but normal by royal standards, which is already a suspiciously low bar. He had political goals, religious enemies, a taste for power, and one terrible idea waiting patiently in the background. Henry strongly supported Catholicism in France and went after Protestants with terrifying enthusiasm. Some were burned, some had their tongues cut out, because apparently theology needed a royal mute button. Charming era, lovely people, very normal hats. But Henry's bigger moment came near the end of the Italian Wars. These wars dragged across Europe for decades, pulling France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and Italian states into exhaustion. By 1559, after roughly 65 years of fighting, the major powers finally signed the Peace of Cato Cambresis. The wars were over, France could breathe, Europe could stop bleeding for 5 minutes, which was ambitious. Henry had another reason to celebrate. His daughter Elizabeth was being married to King Philip II of Spain. Peace, marriage, diplomacy, a perfect royal moment where everyone wore expensive fabric and silently calculated betrayal. Naturally, Henry decided this called for a tournament, a jousting tournament, because apparently peace needed impact damage. Nothing says, "Thank God the wars are over," like galloping at another human with a weaponized tree branch. Jousting was supposed to be controlled violence, ceremonial danger, fancy courage without technically declaring war before lunch. Two riders charge, lances hit shields or armor, wood splinters, crowds cheer. Everyone goes home slightly concussed. That was the idea, but history loves an idea. Then it looks for the crack in it. On June 30th, 1559, Henry personally entered the tournament. Warning sign. He was not some random knight impressing a balcony. He was the King of France. He had heirs, duties, and an entire country depending on continued breathing. But no, he wanted to joust. And after earlier passes, Henry insisted on another run against Gabriel de Montgomery. Montgomery was captain of the Scottish Guard. Imagine your boss, the king, saying, "Hit me with a lance." What do you say? "No, Your Majesty, I prefer not to accidentally alter European history"? Good luck. So they charged. Horses thundered forward. Armor flashed. For 1 second, it looked like perfect royal glory. Then the lance shattered, which was normal. Lances break dramatically so everyone can say, "Ah yes, courage." But this time, a broken piece of Montgomery's lance did not politely fall away. It slipped through Henry's visor and drove into his face near the eye. Suddenly, the celebration of peace became a horror scene. The cheering stopped. The king was wounded. Not symbolically, not lightly. Seriously, because controlled danger forgot the contract. Henry was carried away. Royal surgeons rushed in, which in the 16th century was not always comforting. They examined the wound and tried to understand the damage because apparently skull troubleshooting was now the afternoon schedule. They even practiced on the heads of executed criminals to figure out what might be done. Creative. Horrifying. But creative. Still, the injury was too severe. Over the next days, Henry suffered terribly, and infection set in. His condition worsened. On July 10, 1559, Henry II of France died from the tournament wound. A king who helped end a long war did not die in that war. He died at the party afterward. That makes this the perfect final chapter. Not just embarrassing, but almost insulting. Henry survived politics, war, and diplomacy. Then a piece of wood said, "Actually, one more announcement." Voice. That is the pattern. The doorway did not know Louis was king. The deer did not respect Basil's dynasty. The toilet did not care about Edmund's nickname. The lampreys did not admire Henry's reforms. The candle did not fear Charles the Bad, and the lance splinter did not stop to read Henry II's treaty. These men lived in worlds built to tell them they were special. Crowns, courts, armies, servants, chroniclers, everything agreed. But destiny has a weird sense of humor. Sometimes it does not arrive as a rival king or an army. Sometimes destiny is 5 inches of low doorway. Sometimes it is a confused deer. Sometimes it is a badly guarded bathroom. Sometimes it is dinner. Sometimes it is a candle. Sometimes it is a splinter with very aggressive timing. That is why these stories are hard to forget. They are funny, yes, darkly funny. Apologize to a skeleton funny. But underneath the joke is something sharper. Power is a costume. A crown is a metal cosplay. A throne is expensive furniture. And a king is still a human body moving through corners, animals, fire, food, and bad decisions. History pretends it is shaped only by grand forces. War, religion, dynasty, empire, all the big, dramatic words. But sometimes the future turns because somebody ducked too late, or one room had very bad security. Sometimes a dynasty ends because a grieving old man could not stop eating toothy nightmare fish. So yes, some kings died like legends. These kings died like deleted cartoon scenes, proving physics is deeply Republican.